Amara Johnson checked her travel bag one final time before zipping it closed. It was 5:30 a.m., and the soft morning light barely filtered through the curtains of her bedroom. Her husband, Michael, still in his pajamas, leaned against the doorframe watching her with admiration. "You sure you don't want me to come to the airport with you?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Amara smiled, tucking a strand of her curly black hair behind her ear. "We'll be fine. You have that important meeting, and we practiced this. Elijah and I can handle it." Michael nodded, though reluctance showed in his eyes. As the CEO of WasAirline, one of the country's major carriers, his schedule rarely allowed flexibility. The irony wasn't lost on Amara that they were flying with National Airways, their biggest competitor, because the timing worked better for Elijah's routine. Down the hall, their 7-year-old son Elijah was already awake, carefully arranging his toy cars in a perfect line on his bedroom floor. The diagnosis of autism 3 years ago had helped them understand his needs better. Elijah was brilliant with numbers and patterns, but struggled with loud noises and unexpected changes. "Good morning, my little astronaut," Amara said, entering his room. "Ready for our big adventure today?" Elijah didn't look up from his cars but nodded. "We're going on a plane. Planes fly at an altitude of 30,000 to 40,000 feet. The air is thin up there." Amara smiled at his encyclopedic knowledge of aviation, a special interest he shared with his father. "That's right. And what are our travel rules? Headphones when it's loud. Deep breaths when I feel funny. Hold mom's hand in crowds," Elijah recited, finally looking up at her. "Perfect," Amara said, helping him pack his comfort items. Noise-canceling headphones, his favorite blue dinosaur, and a weighted blanket for the flight. In the kitchen, Michael had prepared breakfast. Elijah's preferred plain pancakes cut into precise triangles with exactly 2 tablespoons of maple syrup in a separate cup for dipping. "I've checked you in online," Michael said, passing Amara their boarding passes. "You'll have good seats near the front, away from the engines and bathrooms." Amara nodded gratefully. "Thanks. Your airline knowledge comes in handy, Mr. CEO, she teased. Michael laughed softly. "Just call if you need anything. I can have someone meet you at any airport if necessary." "We don't need special treatment," Amara reminded him. "Just a normal trip like anyone else." The ride to the airport was smooth, with Elijah watching buildings pass by, counting red cars as they went. Their driver, familiar with the family, kept the radio off and the temperature exactly as Elijah preferred. At the airport drop-off, Amara thanked the driver and took a deep breath. This was the challenging part. Airports were overwhelming for anyone, but especially for Elijah. "Remember our plan," she told Elijah as she helped him with his small backpack. "If it gets too loud, what do we do?" "Headphones on, find a quiet corner," he responded, squeezing his dinosaur tightly. The morning sun reflected off the glass terminal building as they walked inside. Amara noticed people rushing in all directions, announcements blaring overhead, and the constant beeping of carts. She felt Elijah's hand tighten around hers. "You're doing great," she whispered, guiding him toward the check-in counters. Neither Amara nor Elijah knew that this ordinary beginning would lead to an extraordinary confrontation, one that would expose prejudice, challenge an airline's culture, and ultimately bring about unexpected change. For now, they were simply a mother and son starting what was supposed to be a routine journey to visit family, unaware of the storm waiting for them above the clouds. The airport terminal buzzed with activity as Amara guided Elijah toward the security checkpoint. Morning flights meant crowds, and crowds meant noise, something Elijah struggled with. She felt his small hand tighten around hers as a loud announcement echoed through the terminal. "Too loud," Elijah whispered, his eyes darting nervously around the busy space. "I know, buddy. Let's put your headphones on," Amara said, reaching into his backpack to retrieve the blue noise-canceling headphones Michael had bought him for Christmas. As she placed them over his ears, Elijah's shoulders relaxed slightly. The security line stretched longer than Amara had expected. She checked her watch, still plenty of time before boarding, but standing in line was hard for Elijah. In front of them, a businessman repeatedly sighed and checked his watch, while behind them a family with 3 excitable children pushed forward, bumping against Elijah's backpack. "Please be careful," Amara said politely to the mother. "My son needs a little space." The woman pulled her children back with an apologetic smile, but the businessman turned around with an irritated glance. "Everyone needs space," he muttered. "Some of us have meetings to get to." Amara chose to ignore him, focusing instead on Elijah, who had begun to rock slightly, his way of self-regulating when stressed. She knelt down to his level, making eye contact. "We're almost there. Let's count the blue signs, okay?" Elijah nodded, finding comfort in the counting activity. 1, 2, 3. He began, his voice soft but steady. When they finally reached the security screening, Amara prepared Elijah as they had practiced at home. "Remember, we need to take off our shoes and put your dinosaur in the bin. You'll get him back in just 1 minute." The TSA agent watched them with impatience. "Ma'am, we need to keep the line moving. My son has autism. We just need a moment," Amara explained calmly. The agent's expression softened slightly. "Okay, but please hurry." Elijah hesitated before placing his beloved dinosaur in the plastic bin. "Blue Buddy will take a special ride and meet you on the other side," Amara reminded him. As they walked through the metal detector, a loud alarm blared. Elijah immediately covered his ears even through the headphones and began to rock more intensely. "I need to do a pat-down," a female TSA agent said, approaching Elijah. "Please, can you explain to him first?" Amara requested. "He doesn't like unexpected touches." The woman nodded and knelt down to Elijah's level. "Hi there. I need to make sure you don't have anything in your pockets. I'm going to gently touch your arms and legs. Is that okay?" Elijah looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay," he whispered. An older woman waiting behind them smiled at Amara. "You're doing a wonderful job with him," she said warmly. The unexpected kindness brought tears to Amara's eyes. "Thank you," she replied, grateful for the simple acknowledgement. After clearing security, they stopped at a quiet corner near their gate. Elijah needed to decompress before boarding. Amara checked their boarding passes. Group 2, seats 12A and 12B, good seats, away from the engine noise, just as Michael had arranged. As they sat in the waiting area, Elijah became fascinated by the planes visible through the large windows. "Boeing 737-800, he said, pointing to their aircraft. "It can fly 3,115 miles without stopping." A man sitting nearby looked up, impressed. "He knows his planes," he commented to Amara. "His father works in the airline industry," she replied, not mentioning Michael's position. They preferred to travel like regular passengers, not as the family of an airline CEO. The gate agent announced pre-boarding for families with small children and passengers needing extra assistance. Amara gathered their belongings. "That's us, Elijah. Ready to see the clouds up close?" Elijah nodded, clutching Blue Buddy tightly as they approached the gate. Amara had no way of knowing that the relative calm of their airport experience was about to give way to a storm inside the narrow confines of Flight 372 to Denver. Pre-boarding for families with small children and passengers requiring special assistance, the gate agent announced. Amara gently guided Elijah toward the boarding gate, boarding passes in hand. "We're going on the plane now, Elijah. Remember what we practiced?" Amara said softly, kneeling down to his eye level. Elijah nodded. "Deep breaths if it feels scary. Headphones stay on. Hold Blue Buddy tight." The gate agent smiled as she scanned their tickets. "Good morning. Window seat for the little traveler, I see. Enjoy your flight to Denver." As they entered the jet bridge, Elijah's steps slowed. The narrow, dimly lit tunnel always made him anxious. Amara noticed his hesitation and squeezed his hand reassuringly. "It's just like our practice walks at the mall. The plane is right at the end." A businessman behind them sighed loudly. "Can you please hurry up? Some of us have connections to make." Amara turned slightly. "We're moving as quickly as we can. My son needs a moment." The man pushed past them, muttering something under his breath. Elijah flinched at the sudden movement but remained calm, his focus entirely on the blue dinosaur in his hand. At the aircraft door, they were greeted by Rebecca Walsh, a flight attendant with perfectly styled blonde hair and a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," Rebecca said, her gaze quickly assessing Amara and Elijah. "Please move along quickly. We have a full flight today." Amara nodded politely. "We'll just need a moment to get settled. My son has autism and—" "We have a schedule to maintain," Rebecca interrupted, her smile growing tighter. Other passengers are waiting. Amara felt her cheeks warm, but kept her voice level. I understand. We'll be quick, but he needs a minute to adjust to new environments. Rebecca glanced at her watch pointedly. Seats 12A and B are on your right. As they moved down the aisle, Elijah stopped abruptly, fascinated by the cockpit door which was still open with pilots preparing for departure. Look, Mom, the captain has 4 stripes. First officers have 3 stripes. Flight engineers have 2, he stated, his voice rising with excitement. That's right, buddy. So smart. Amara praised, gently urging him forward. Behind them, Rebecca's voice carried clearly. Parents these days just don't know how to control their children, she remarked to another flight attendant. This is going to be a long flight. The other flight attendant, an older man with kind eyes, frowned at Rebecca's comment but said nothing. When they reached row 12, Amara helped Elijah into the window seat, arranging his comfort items around him. Just as they were getting settled, Rebecca appeared beside them. That backpack needs to go in the overhead compartment or completely under the seat, she said, pointing to Elijah's small bag. He needs access to his comfort items, Amara explained. It's small enough to fit partially under the seat. Airline policy is very clear. All the way under or overhead, Rebecca insisted, her voice growing louder. Elijah began to rock slightly, picking up on the tension. Amara took a deep breath, remembering Michael's advice about staying calm during confrontations. I understand policy, but the Air Carrier Access Act provides accommodations for passengers with disabilities, Amara said quietly. We've flown many times before without issue. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. Are you telling me how to do my job? A woman across the aisle leaned over. The bag's not bothering anyone. It's barely sticking out. Rebecca turned to the passenger. I'm handling this, ma'am. The lead flight attendant, noticing the developing situation, approached them. Is everything okay here? This passenger is refusing to properly stow her son's bag, Rebecca reported. It contains his comfort items, Amara explained to the lead attendant. He has autism and may need quick access during the flight. The lead flight attendant nodded understandingly. That's fine, as long as it's mostly under the seat for takeoff and landing. Rebecca pressed her lips together in obvious disapproval before walking away. As she left, Amara clearly heard her mutter, some people think rules don't apply to them. Elijah, oblivious to the tension, pressed his face against the window, watching the ground crew load luggage. Mom, did you know airplane windows have 3 layers of acrylic? Amara smiled, but her heart was racing. The flight hadn't even taken off yet, and she already felt unwelcome. She wondered if Rebecca's attitude was about Elijah's behavior, their race, or both. Either way, she had a sinking feeling that the tension was far from over. The aircraft climbed steadily through the clouds, the gentle hum of the engines providing a soothing background noise. Amara watched as Elijah counted the passing clouds, his face pressed against the window. For the first 30 minutes, the flight progressed smoothly. Elijah remained calm with his headphones on, occasionally whispering facts about airplanes to his mother. Did you know planes can fly even if one engine stops working? He said, his eyes still fixed on the clouds outside. That's right, buddy. They're built to be very safe, Amara replied, relieved that the boarding tension seemed behind them. The seatbelt sign suddenly illuminated with a loud ding. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Folks, we're expecting some turbulence ahead. Flight attendants, please take your seats. The plane began to shake almost immediately. First small bumps, then stronger jolts that made the overhead bins rattle. For most passengers, it was a minor inconvenience. For Elijah, it was overwhelming. The unpredictable movements combined with the anxiety-inducing sounds sent him into distress. He pressed his hands against his headphones and began rocking back and forth. Too bumpy. Make it stop, Mom, he cried, his voice rising above his usual soft tone. Amara unbuckled her seatbelt to lean closer to him. It's okay, Elijah. Remember our breathing. In through your nose, out through your mouth. The turbulence intensified. Elijah's rocking became more pronounced, and he started repeating, planes are safe, getting louder with each repetition. A few passengers turned to look. An elderly woman across the aisle gave Amara a sympathetic smile, but others seemed annoyed by the disruption. Rebecca Walsh appeared in the aisle, despite the seatbelt sign. She gripped the seats for balance as the plane continued to bounce. "Ma'am, you need to control your son," she said sharply, "and your seatbelt should be fastened." "He has autism," Amara explained, trying to stay calm while refastening her seatbelt. "The turbulence is triggering sensory overload. They'll calm down soon." Rebecca's face hardened. "Well, he's disturbing other passengers. Can't you give him something to keep him quiet?" The comment stung Amara deeply. He's not a pet to be sedated. He's a child trying to cope with a difficult situation. Elijah's distress increased with the confrontation. He began humming loudly, a self-soothing behavior that helped him process overwhelming sensations. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Rebecca said, loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "Some people shouldn't travel if they can't behave appropriately in public." A shocked silence fell over the nearby passengers. Amara felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What exactly are you implying?" Rebecca leaned closer, lowering her voice but still audible to those around them. "Look, I've been flying for 15 years. I know the difference between a child with special needs and one who's just poorly disciplined. Maybe if you spent more time on parenting." "Are you serious right now?" interrupted a man from the row behind. "The kid is clearly struggling with the turbulence." "Back off." Rebecca straightened up, her face flushed. "Sir, please don't interfere with crew instructions." "Those weren't instructions," said the elderly woman across the aisle. "That was harassment." The plane jolted again, and Rebecca grabbed a seat back to steady herself. Elijah had curled into a ball, hands over his headphones, eyes squeezed shut. Amara wrapped her arm around him protectively. "I'm reporting your behavior when we land," Amara said firmly. "You have no right to speak to us this way." Rebecca's expression changed slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face before hardening again. "We'll see about that. National Airways has procedures for disruptive passengers, too." As Rebecca moved away, the male flight attendant who had been at the boarding door approached with a glass of water and a kind smile. "I'm Carlos. Is there anything I can do to help you and your son?" he asked quietly. The simple act of kindness brought tears to Amara's eyes. She hadn't realized until that moment how alone she had felt during the confrontation. "Thank you," she whispered. "The water will help." Amara didn't know it yet, but several passengers had already pressed their call buttons, asking to speak to the lead flight attendant about what they had just witnessed. The incident was far from over, and Rebecca Walsh had no idea who she had just humiliated. The aftermath of Rebecca's harsh words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Amara focused entirely on Elijah, who was still curled into himself, rocking gently. The turbulence had eased, but his distress remained. She kept her voice low and steady, the way they practiced at home. "You're safe, Elijah. The bumpy part is almost over. Let's count backward from 20 together." Elijah's rocking slowed as he whispered, 20, 19, 18. Each number came out a little calmer than the last. Carlos, the kind flight attendant, returned with a small bag of pretzels and a napkin. He knelt in the aisle beside their row. "Sometimes having something to focus on helps," he said quietly to Amara. "I have a nephew with sensory processing issues. Would it be okay to offer these to him when he's ready?" Amara nodded gratefully. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." The elderly woman across the aisle leaned over. "I'm Patricia," she introduced herself. "I taught special education for 35 years before retiring. That flight attendant's behavior was completely unacceptable." "I recorded the whole thing," said a young woman from the row behind, holding up her phone. "I'm a disability rights advocate. If you want a copy of the video for your complaint, just let me know." Amara felt a wave of emotion wash over her. After feeling so isolated during Rebecca's attack, the support from strangers was overwhelming. "Thank you all," she managed to say. A businessman in a suit stood up from his seat 3 rows ahead and pressed the call button. When Carlos approached, the man spoke in a low but firm voice. "I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant, please. What we just witnessed was discrimination, plain and simple." Carlos nodded. "She's already been notified, sir." Throughout the cabin, a ripple effect had taken hold. Passengers who witnessed the incident were whispering to those who hadn't, creating a wave of concerned glances toward Amara and Elijah and disapproving looks when Rebecca passed by. The lead flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with a name tag reading Margaret, made her way down the aisle. She stopped beside Amara's row. "Ma'am, I understand there was an incident earlier. I'd like to speak with you privately if possible," she said with genuine concern in her voice. "I can't leave my son right now," Amara replied. Of course, Margaret nodded understandingly. "I've been informed about what happened, and I want to assure you that we take these matters very seriously. Rebecca will not be serving this section of the cabin for the remainder of the flight." Patricia spoke up from across the aisle. "That's not enough. What she did was cruel and unprofessional." Several nearby passengers murmured in agreement. Margaret lowered her voice. "I understand, and there will be a full investigation. I've already contacted the ground supervisor who will meet us upon arrival. I'd like to take your statement then, if you're willing." Amara nodded, relief washing over her. She hadn't been sure if she would be believed. Elijah had finally calmed down, his breathing returning to normal as he methodically arranged the pretzels Carlos had brought into a perfect circle on his napkin. The simple activity helped center him, providing the predictability he needed after the chaos. "Mom," he whispered, "the nice man brought me pretzels shaped like tiny knots." "Yes, he did." Amara smiled, brushing a curl from his forehead. "That was very kind of him." As if sensing the tension had broken, passengers around them returned to their books and screens. Patricia offered to show Elijah a simple origami bird she could make with her napkin, which he watched with fascination. From the front of the cabin, Rebecca watched the scene unfold with growing unease. The passengers had rallied around the mother and child she had berated. She saw Margaret taking notes at her station and several passengers showing something on their phones to Carlos. For the first time, she wondered if she had misjudged the situation badly. What none of them knew was that Amara had already sent a brief text to Michael before the plane reached cruising altitude. "Having issues with a flight attendant. Everything okay now? We'll call when we land. Love you." Michael had read the message with concern, but he had no idea of the full story yet, or how quickly things would escalate once the plane touched down in Denver. The aircraft touched down in Denver with a gentle bump. As passengers prepared to disembark, Amara helped Elijah gather his belongings. His blue dinosaur had slipped under the seat during the turbulence, and she retrieved it for him. "We're here, buddy. You did so well," she praised him, her voice warm with pride. Elijah smiled, the stressful incident now behind him. "Can we watch the planes at the big window again before we meet Grandma?" "Absolutely," Amara promised. She noticed Margaret, the lead flight attendant, watching them from the front of the cabin with a concerned expression. As the seatbelt sign turned off, Patricia from across the aisle stood and handed Amara a business card. "I was serious about being a witness. 35 years in special education taught me to recognize discrimination when I see it." "Thank you," Amara said, tucking the card into her purse. The young woman who had recorded the incident also approached. "I've sent the video to your email. No child should be treated that way, especially by airline staff." As passengers filed out, Margaret approached Amara. "Ma'am, our customer service manager is waiting to speak with you at the gate. I filed an initial report about the incident." Rebecca stood at the front of the plane, her face unreadable as she mechanically thanked departing passengers. When she noticed Margaret speaking with Amara, she quickly looked away. In the terminal, a man in a crisp National Airways uniform waited at the gate. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm Robert Chen, customer service manager. We'd like to speak with you about what happened on board." Amara checked her watch. "My mother is waiting to pick us up. Could we make this quick?" "Of course," Robert said, guiding them to a quiet corner of the gate area. "I understand there was an incident involving one of our flight attendants. We take these matters very seriously." While Elijah was distracted by the planes outside the window, Amara gave Robert a detailed account of what had happened. His expression grew increasingly troubled as she spoke. "This is completely unacceptable," he said when she finished. "I want to assure you that appropriate action will be taken." "I don't want anyone to lose their job," Amara clarified. "But your staff needs better training on how to support passengers with disabilities." Robert nodded. "May I ask, would you be willing to file a formal complaint? It would help ensure this situation is addressed properly." "Yes," Amara said firmly. "And I'd like to receive confirmation that changes will be made." "Absolutely," Robert assured her. Could I have your contact information to follow up? Amara handed him her business card. Robert glanced at it, then did a double take when he read her name. Johnson. Amara Johnson? Are you related to Michael Johnson by any chance? He asked, his voice suddenly cautious. He's my husband, Amara replied simply. The color drained from Robert's face. Everyone in the airline industry knew Michael Johnson, CEO of SkyWest Airlines, National Airways' biggest competitor. I had no idea, he stammered. Mrs. Johnson, please allow me to extend our deepest apologies. This situation will be addressed at the highest levels, I assure you. My name shouldn't matter, Amara said firmly. Every passenger deserves respect, regardless of who they're married to. Meanwhile, at the arrival gate, Rebecca was checking her phone during her brief break when a fellow flight attendant rushed up to her. Becca, you won't believe this, she whispered urgently. That woman you argued with. Her husband is Michael Johnson. Who? Rebecca asked, not recognizing the name. Michael Johnson, the CEO of SkyWest Airlines. Everyone in the industry knows him. He's like one of the most powerful men in commercial aviation. Rebecca's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Not only had she mistreated a passenger and her disabled child, but that passenger was married to one of the most influential figures in the airline industry. Back at the SkyWest headquarters, Michael Johnson's phone rang. He smiled when he saw it was Amara calling to let him know they had landed safely. His smile quickly faded as he listened to what had happened on the flight. I'll handle this, he said, his voice calm but determined. No one treats my family, or any family, that way. Michael Johnson sat at his desk, staring at the email he had just received from James Parker, the CEO of National Airways. The two men had known each other for years as respectful competitors in the airline industry. Now, this incident had connected them in an unexpected way. I'd just reviewed the footage and passenger statements, Michael said into his phone. Amara was on the other end, having settled Elijah at her mother's house for an afternoon nap after the stressful journey. Michael, I don't want you to make this a bigger deal because of who you are, Amara said. That's exactly what I was trying to explain to the customer service manager. This isn't about us being special. I know, honey, Michael replied, his voice gentle but firm. But this isn't about me pulling strings. It's about making sure this never happens to any family again. After hanging up, Michael dialed James Parker directly. The National Airways CEO answered on the second ring. Michael, I was just about to call you, James said. I want to personally apologize for what happened to your wife and son. James, I'm not calling as the husband of a passenger or as a CEO, Michael clarified. I'm calling as someone who cares deeply about this industry. We both know that what happened today reflects a bigger problem. On the other side of Denver, Rebecca Walsh sat nervously in a small conference room at the National Airways office. The regional director of flight operations sat across from her, reviewing the incident report. Next to him was the airline's head of training. Ms. Walsh, we've reviewed the video footage and taken statements from multiple passengers and crew members, the director said, his expression grave. What do you have to say about your actions today? Rebecca's hands trembled slightly. I made a mistake. I didn't realize the passenger was. Was what? The director interrupted. The wife of a competitor's CEO. Is that really the issue here? Rebecca looked down at her hands. No, sir. The issue, the head of training said firmly, is that you discriminated against a passenger with a disability and his mother. Whether they were related to industry executives or not is completely irrelevant. Back at SkyWest headquarters, Michael was reviewing preliminary plans for a new initiative. His assistant had just brought him a fresh cup of coffee when his phone rang again. It was Amara. The airline called, she said. They want me to meet with their training department tomorrow. They're interested in developing better protocols for assisting passengers with autism. Michael smiled. That's my brilliant wife. You turned this into something positive already. It shouldn't have taken this incident to make it happen, Amara sighed. But if it leads to change, then some good will come from it. The next morning, Rebecca Walsh arrived at her apartment door to find a certified letter. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was an official notice of suspension pending further investigation. At the bottom was information about a mandatory sensitivity training program she would need to complete before any consideration of reinstatement. She sat down heavily on her couch, the reality of her actions finally sinking in. Her phone buzzed with a text from her fellow flight attendant Carlos. "Hope you're ok. For what it's worth, I think you can learn from this. We all can." At National Airways headquarters, James Parker addressed his executive team. "I've spoken with Michael Johnson at SkyWest. He's offered to collaborate with us on an industry-wide initiative for better disability training." "Won't that look like we're admitting fault?" asked the head of public relations. "We are at fault," James replied firmly. "And we're going to own it. More importantly, we're going to fix it." That afternoon, Amara sat in a conference room with National Airways training staff. She had brought materials from autism advocacy organizations and her own experiences traveling with Elijah. "The key is understanding that meltdowns are not tantrums," she explained. "They're responses to overwhelming sensory input or unexpected changes." The head of training nodded, taking notes. "Mrs. Johnson, would you consider helping us develop a training module for our staff?" Amara thought about the fearful look on Elijah's face during the flight, and then about all the other children like him who would fly in the future. "Yes," she said decisively, "I would be honored to help." As the meeting concluded, Amara received a text message with a photo. Michael had taken Elijah to visit the SkyWest hangar, and the picture showed him sitting in the captain's seat of an aircraft, beaming with joy. Below the photo was a simple message: "Making the skies friendly for everyone, one pilot at a time." Amara smiled. This was never about revenge or special treatment. It was about making the world a little more understanding, one small step at a time. 6 months had passed since the incident on National Airways Flight 372. The autumn leaves fell gently outside the large windows of the airline's training center in Denver. Inside, a classroom of 30 flight attendants, some new recruits, others experienced crew members, sat attentively as Amara Johnson adjusted the microphone on her lapel. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice warm but confident. "My name is Amara Johnson, and I'm here to share our family's story and help you understand how to better serve passengers with invisible disabilities." At the back of the room, Michael sat with Elijah, who was focused on drawing airplanes in his sketchbook. Next to them was James Parker, the CEO of National Airways, who had personally made this training program a priority. "6 months ago, my son and I had an experience that none of us should have had," Amara continued. "But today, I'm not here to dwell on that. I'm here because something positive came from it." In the third row, Rebecca Walsh sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her uniform was gone, replaced by business casual attire. After her suspension, she had requested to be part of the solution. It hadn't been an easy road back. "The first thing to understand about autism is that no two people experience it the same way," Amara explained, showing slides that Elijah had helped create. "My son might be bothered by loud noises, while another passenger might struggle with bright lights." Rebecca listened intently, occasionally taking notes. The past months had been a journey of reflection for her. The incident had forced her to confront biases she hadn't known she carried. After the main presentation, Amara invited Elijah to join her at the front. Now 8 years old, he had grown more confident in social situations through practice and support. "Elijah, would you like to tell these nice people about your airplane models?" Amara asked. Elijah nodded, approaching the microphone with careful steps. "I have 17 model airplanes. My favorite is the Boeing 787 Dreamliner because it has special windows that get darker without pulling down a shade." The room broke into warm applause, causing Elijah to cover his ears slightly but still smile with pride. During the break, Rebecca approached Amara cautiously. This wasn't their first meeting since the incident that had happened 3 months earlier, a difficult but necessary conversation facilitated by the airline's Human Resources Department. "Your presentation was really helpful," Rebecca said, "especially the part about recognizing the difference between a meltdown and a tantrum." Amara nodded. "It's all about understanding. No one expects perfection, just willingness to learn." Across the room, Michael chatted with James Parker about the industry-wide initiative they had launched together. What had started as a response to one incident had grown into a collaborative effort between major airlines to improve accessibility training. "The feedback from passengers has been overwhelmingly positive," James was saying. Complaints related to disability issues are down 23% already. Michael nodded. It's a good start. SkyWest's numbers are similar, but we still have work to do. As the training session resumed, Carlos, now promoted to lead flight attendant, presented the practical portion, demonstrating techniques for assisting passengers with various needs. The most important thing to remember, he emphasized, is that a little compassion goes a long way. We're not just transporting people, we're caring for them during their journey. At the end of the day, as participants received their certification cards, Rebecca found herself standing next to Elijah, who was admiring a model airplane display in the hallway. That's a Boeing 737 MAX 10, he said, pointing to one of the models. It can fly 3,300 nautical miles without stopping. I didn't know that, Rebecca replied genuinely. You know so much about planes. Maybe I'll be a pilot someday, Elijah said, or maybe I'll design them. Amara watched the interaction from a few steps away, feeling a sense of completion. The painful incident had transformed into something meaningful, not just for her family, but for countless travelers who would never know the story behind the changes. As they left the training center, Amara noticed a new poster on the wall. Every passenger has a story. Our job is to make it a good one. Below it, in smaller letters, dedicated to Elijah Johnson, who taught us to see the world differently. Sometimes, Amara reflected, the most important journeys weren't between destinations on a map, but between how things were and how they could be.